My father looked me in the eye, cold, steady, and said, "You were never really my daughter." He said it like it meant nothing. Like the 28 years I spent calling him Dad could just be erased with one sentence. He said it to take every cent of my mother's inheritance, to rip away the only thing she left me when she died. But what he didn't know was that I had proof. And when karma came for him, it came faster and crueler than I ever imagined. My name is Celia Quinn. I'm 28 years old, and until a few months ago, I thought I understood my place in the world. I'm an artist, mostly oils and charcoal, and I teach part-time at a local community center in Renbridge. Small town, coastal air, glassy gray mornings. The kind of place where everyone smiles too wide and secrets are layered under the wallpaper. But my world didn't really begin with the town. It began with her, my mother, Leona. She was the kind of woman people remembered long after they left the room. Not because she was loud or striking or overly polished, but because she had this way of seeing straight through you. She loved gently, but entirely. Like when she looked at me, there was never a question of if she cared, only how deeply. And then there was my father, Martin Quinn. On paper, he looked like the dream. A successful estate attorney with an impeccable record, generous with charities, always dressed like he'd just stepped out of a high-profile magazine shoot. Salt and pepper hair, gold cufflinks, a voice made for closing deals and silencing objections. To most of the world, he was admired, trusted. To me, he was tolerable, distant but decent. The kind of man who showed up to parent-teacher conferences but left his phone on the entire time. He and my mother weren't in love, not really. You could tell in the small things. The way she paused before speaking around him. How his compliments came on cue, like clockwork, never at random. Growing up, I told myself their quiet was just stability. But deep down, I always felt like there was a layer between us. One I could never quite peel back. Still, we had a routine. A rhythm. And when my mom got sick, that rhythm shattered. It started with fatigue. Then chest pain. Then the kind of cough that made the walls feel too thin. Within 4 months, the diagnosis came, aggressive late-stage lymphoma. I sat beside her hospital bed every night I could, read her the poems she used to recite to me, painted while she slept. I thought if I just stayed close enough, long enough, she'd somehow get better. But nothing stopped the clock. She passed away on a Thursday morning in February, holding my hand, her skin like paper. The moment she exhaled her last breath, something hollow opened in me. Not just grief, fear. Like I'd just been unmoored, set adrift from the only compass I'd ever known. We buried her 3 days later. The funeral was quiet, tasteful, arranged by my father with surgical efficiency. He barely cried, just pressed his lips together and squeezed my shoulder like a CEO congratulating an intern. I didn't ask much of him. I thought grief just looked different on everyone. But now I wonder if he ever grieved her at all. A few weeks after the funeral, I received a call from my mother's personal attorney, a woman named Patrice Geller. She'd been with my mom for years. Not just legally, personally. They went to book club together. Volunteered at the same shelter. My mother trusted her with everything. Patrice asked me to come in for the reading of the will. She said it wasn't complicated, but she preferred to do it in person. I assumed my father would be there too. He was. Pressed gray suit. Immaculate watch. Not a single wrinkle out of place. The kind of appearance you reserve for big client meetings. We sat across from each other at the long mahogany table, flanked by brass lamps and floor-to-ceiling shelves. Patrice's voice was steady, neutral. She read the clauses carefully, line by line. That's when it hit me. Everything. The house. The art. The letters. The money. The retirement accounts. My mother had left it all to me. Martin's name wasn't mentioned. Not once. Not even the car. Not even the matching pearl cufflinks he always claimed were a gift from Leona. The silence in the room after Patrice closed the folder was thick. Heavy. I remember glancing at my father, expecting confusion, or at least surprise. But what I saw was something colder. Calculation. He didn't even blink. He leaned back in his chair, interlaced his fingers, and said, "Well, that changes things." The next week blurred together. Meetings with estate clerks. Phone calls from old family friends offering polite condolences. A few quiet evenings where I tried to clean out her closet and ended up curled on the floor with one of her scarves pressed to my face. And then one afternoon a letter arrived. Official. Heavy seal. My name printed in sharp black ink. It was from my father's attorney. Martin Quinn was contesting the will. The grounds? Paternity fraud. He claimed I was not his biological daughter, and never had been. That my mother concealed the truth. That I was legally not entitled to the inheritance because I was no rightful heir. I dropped the letter. My breath went shallow. My vision blurred. I read it again. And again. It didn't make sense. He had never questioned it. Never hinted at doubt. Not when I graduated. Not when I was hospitalized at 14. Not when we vacationed in Barcelona, and he spent 3 hours arguing with a vendor over a custom nameplate that said, "Daddy's girl." Until it was about money. That was the moment I knew something deeper had broken. Not just the trust. Not just the family tree. Me. I drove to the estate that night. It was still technically my home, though it felt haunted now. Not by ghosts, but by memories that didn't know where to land anymore. The same framed photos still lined the hallway. The same porcelain vases perched on every marble edge. It all looked untouched. As if my mother would turn the corner at any second. Martin was sitting in the study, a glass of bourbon in one hand, some legal documents in the other. He looked up when I walked in but didn't rise. "Here to beg?" he asked. My jaw clenched. "You're contesting Mom's will." "Why?" He took a slow sip and smiled. Not cruelly, just confidently. "She was irrational near the end. We both know that. Grief makes people rewrite the past." My voice cracked. "She was dying, not senile." He shrugged. "Leona was always dramatic. She wanted you to have your fantasy. That's fine. But I'm not going to let her rewrite facts just because she felt guilty." My knees went weak. I gripped the edge of the chair across from him. "What facts?" He set the glass down. "You're not mine, Celia. You never were." He said it cleanly, like discussing weather, like untying a knot that no longer served a purpose. I couldn't speak. My throat was closing. My fingers dug into the armrest. I stared at him, searching for any trace of the man who used to hum lullabies when I had nightmares. But that man wasn't there. "You were hers," he continued, "and I raised you out of respect. But this inheritance? It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to me, and the court will agree." He stood up then, like the conversation was over. Like my entire existence was just a formality he could step past. I didn't say anything as he left the room. I just sat there, surrounded by the air of a house that suddenly felt like it was never mine to begin with. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my apartment until 3 a.m., pulling out old photo albums, letters, drawings I made as a kid that my mother had saved in a brown accordion folder. I looked at everything with new eyes. Had she really lied to me all this time? Had I spent my life living a fiction she spun out of guilt? No. She wouldn't have done that. Not my mother. And yet doubt crept in. Not because I believed him, but because his words were like poison. Once they entered, they started to spread. I needed answers. Real ones. So the next morning, I called Patrice. I asked her, desperately, if she knew anything. If there was anything in my mother's files or private notes. Patrice hesitated, then said something I'll never forget. "She gave me something. For you." A week before she passed. When I met Patrice again, she was quieter. Sadder. But she didn't delay. She handed me a small black envelope sealed with wax. On the front was my name, written in my mother's handwriting, curved, soft, careful. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A letter. Folded twice. It read, "My Celia, if you're reading this, then he's doing exactly what I feared he would. I never wanted you to know him this way. But I need you to understand something. You are mine. Entirely. And yes, you're his too, though he never earned the right to claim you. Martin changed after you were born. He became ambitious, cold. He saw people as assets, not family. I stayed because I believed in vows, and because I wanted you to have a father. But when I drafted my will, I knew he'd fight it. He always fights when he's losing control. Don't let him rewrite your worth. You are not the sum of his denial. With all that I am.
Mom.
I wept. For the first time since she passed, I let myself fall apart. Her words wrapped around me like armor and ache all at once. She had known. She had seen this coming. And she had left me the truth, even if it came wrapped in heartbreak. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my journal. Then I picked up my phone and ordered a DNA test. I mailed the DNA kit the next day. The instructions were sterile: swab, seal, send, but my hands trembled the whole time. Not from fear of the results.
No.
I knew what they'd say. I was his daughter. I had to be. There were memories. Moments. Didn't those count for something? But somewhere deep inside, a colder truth stirred. This wasn't about biology. This was about control. And Martin Quinn had always needed to be in control. The waiting nearly destroyed me. Days passed like ghosts. I stopped painting. I stopped eating much. Every time the phone buzzed, my heart jerked. I checked my email, so often I began to hate the sound of the refresh icon. I stayed off social media. Avoided friends. I couldn't handle small talk while my identity felt like it was hanging by a thread. The only person I confided in was Patrice. She checked in daily, with no pressure, no assumptions. Just steady support. She'd known my mother long enough to feel like an extension of her voice. She told me the court hearing for the will contest was set for 3 weeks out. 3 weeks. To prove I wasn't a fraud. To prove my mother wasn't a liar. And then, finally, the results came. I remember everything about the moment I opened the email. The exact position of the sunlight across my desk. The tea gone cold beside my hand. The way my throat closed like I was swallowing glass. Paternity result. Excluded. 0% match. Martin Quinn was not my biological father. I read it. I read it again. Then I walked into the bathroom and threw up. It should have shattered me. Maybe it did. But not in the way Martin expected. Because instead of dissolving, I felt something else rise. Something sharp. Focused. Quietly seething. So he was right. He wasn't my father, not by blood. But what he had done, what he was still doing, wasn't justice.
It was theft.
Not just of money. Of memory. Of my mother's legacy. He waited until she was dead. Until I was alone. Then he wielded this truth like a weapon to rewrite history in his favor. But he didn't know everything. Because I still had the letter. And I still had her voice. And I wasn't going down without a fight. Over the next few days, I dug into everything I had from my mother. Old journals. Audio tapes. Legal documents. Most of it was familiar. But in one dusty leather-bound planner from 1995, wedged behind a photo of us at a zoo, I found something strange. A page tucked between notes. An appointment. Cam. July 2nd, 3 p.m. Confidential. Ask for locked file. Cam? It wasn't a name I recognized. I flipped through more entries. She mentioned Cam again 2 weeks later, but only vaguely. Spoke with Cam again. Still unsure. Could change everything. Must keep copy somewhere safe, just in case. My hands shook. What was this? What did she mean? Could change everything? I knew one thing. This wasn't random. So I called Patrice. She went quiet after I read the entry to her. Then she said, I think I know who Cam is. And if I'm right, your mother may have hidden more than a letter. Cam turned out to be Kieran Maddox, a retired forensic estate consultant. He used to work with Martin years ago, helped detect will fraud, asset misappropriation, and hidden beneficiaries in high-profile estate cases.
He was one of the best.
Then, abruptly, he left the legal world entirely. No public statement. No scandal. Just silence. Patrice remembered the name because he and Leona once worked together on a private case, something she had kept quiet, even from Martin. It wasn't until she checked some old off-site storage records that she found the address, a private P.O. box registered to Leona, closed shortly after her death. Inside, there was a flash drive, encrypted, and a handwritten note addressed to me. The note was short. If you're reading this, it means the past is catching up. Don't trust Martin. He didn't just wait for me to die. He's been preparing for years. I asked Kieran to help uncover the trail. If he's willing to speak to you, listen. Don't let him erase me, Celiora. Not like this. I couldn't stop shaking. My mother had known. She'd seen it coming. And she had planned ahead. That flash drive was the spark. And what it uncovered was fire. Kieran Maddox lived 3 towns over, in a lakeside cabin surrounded by pine and secrecy. He looked older than I expected, gray hair, thin frame, but his eyes were alert, sharp, watchful. He invited me in, and I barely got through my first sentence before he nodded slowly and said, "So it's finally happening." I asked him what he meant. He sighed and leaned forward. Your mother suspected Martin of setting up shell trusts to reroute parts of her estate, even before she passed. She asked me to trace every hidden asset, every account with her name attached. My blood ran cold. She didn't want to believe he'd actually try to cut you out, he continued. But she prepared for the worst. Then he opened his laptop. On the flash drive were dozens of files, some financial, some legal. Memos, emails, wire transfers. Proof that Martin had created multiple LLCs over the last decade and funneled over $3.4 million of joint assets into them using dummy cosigners and offshore transfers. He'd effectively stripped parts of her wealth out of reach before she died, then tried to claim the rest by discrediting me. I felt my stomach flip. All this time, it wasn't about the money she left behind. It was about everything he'd already stolen. But the worst part? He hadn't done it alone. One file on the drive stood out. A video recording, taken secretly. It was grainy, time-stamped 3 years ago, and showed Martin sitting in a cafe with another man. They were going over papers, financial ones. I couldn't hear the audio clearly, but the man he was meeting looked familiar. Then it hit me. My godfather.
Joel.
He was supposed to be my mother's old college friend. He'd attended every birthday, every milestone. The man who taught me to tie knots during camping trips. And he'd been helping Martin drain her estate behind her back. I watched the video 3 times before I could breathe again. Everything I thought I knew about my family was unraveling. The fury inside me boiled into something new. Resolve. Martin wanted to win in court? Fine. Let him try. But I wasn't coming empty-handed. Over the next few days, I worked with Kieran and Patrice to compile everything, timelines, file copies, signatures, transactions. We created a digital and physical portfolio to submit to the court, not just to refute the paternity contest, but to build a counterclaim of fraudulent misappropriation. And quietly, I began laying another plan, one Martin would never see coming. One night, I visited the estate again, my childhood home. He didn't expect me. I knocked once and let myself in. Martin was in the den, sipping wine, reviewing what I assumed was his latest legal brief. He looked up, amused. Change your mind? Finally ready to accept the truth. I stepped forward, calm.
Composed. No.
I came to tell you something. He raised an eyebrow. I got the test results, I said. You were right. You're not my father. His smirk widened. But I continued. You forgot something. He blinked. What's that? I may not be your daughter by blood, but you're still responsible for every dollar you laundered through Mom's accounts. And the courts will agree. I dropped a folder on the table.
His face changed.
Gone was the cool arrogance. His eyes darted across the papers. The dates. The signatures. Then he looked up, rage flickering beneath the surface. You don't know what you're doing. I leaned closer.
No, Martin.
You don't. The court date was locked in, and I was ready. They say courtrooms are about justice. But the truth is, most courtrooms are about performance. And I knew Martin Quinn had spent his whole career performing. He wore his legacy like armor. Harvard Law. 30 years undefeated in estate litigation. A name spoken with quiet reverence in legal circles.
But now?
He stood across from me, sweating behind a silk tie, fighting to erase me from my mother's will. Not because I wasn't her daughter, but because I was, and that made me a threat to everything he'd stolen. The hearing room was cold, sterile, but I'd never felt more awake. I wore one of my mother's scarves, a silk pattern she designed herself. It smelled faintly of lavender and turpentine. She used to paint with it wrapped in her hair. As the bailiff called the session to order, my heart pounded so hard I thought the mic might catch it. Martin's attorney opened with confidence, using phrases like illegitimate heir, paternity exclusion, and emotional bias. He painted a picture of a grieving young woman clinging to fantasies. He said Martin had no moral obligation to support the legacy of a child who was never his own. I sat still, but inside, I was on fire. Then it was our turn. My attorney, a quiet, calculated woman named Rhea, didn't waste time. She presented the DNA results first. Didn't fight it. Just confirmed the facts.
Yes.
The test excludes Mr. Quinn as the biological father, she said. And yes, Ms. Quinn acknowledges that truth. Martin's smirk crept in again. He thought the case was already over. But then Rhea straightened the next file. However, we contest that this fact is irrelevant to the inheritance left by Leona Quinn, deceased, because her will explicitly names Celiora Quinn as her sole heir, not conditional on blood. And we have proof that Martin Quinn acted fraudulently to manipulate and reassign marital assets before her death. Martin sat up straighter. Rhea clicked a remote. The screen behind her lit up. Emails, wire transfers, legal memos. And then, the video. The one of Martin and Joel meeting in secret. The jury leaned forward. One gasped. But we weren't done. Rhea stepped aside, and the next witness was called. Kieran Maddox, Your Honor. Martin's expression froze. Kieran entered the courtroom like a ghost from Martin's past.
Come.
Unbothered. With folders of financial audits and his personal testimony as Leona's consultant. He confirmed the shell companies, the offshore trusts, the forged documents, and most damning of all, he revealed the trigger clause in Leona's private will addendum. If at any time, Martin Quinn attempts to alter or discredit Celiora's status as her legal heir, he read, the entirety of Leona's marital share, including joint property and assets, would be frozen for fraud investigation. Martin turned pale. That clause had teeth. But then came the real knockout. I'd like to submit one more document, Rhea said, lifting a sealed envelope. This was recovered from a private P.O. box belonging to Leona Quinn. She approached the judge and handed it over. He read the label aloud. To be opened only if Martin challenges Celiora's inheritance. He opened it slowly. Inside was a notarized letter in Leona's handwriting. If Martin is reading this, then I'm already gone. And you've done exactly what I feared. You tried to erase our daughter from my legacy. Yes, Martin. Our daughter. Maybe not in blood, but in every other way. You knew that. You accepted her. You gave her your name. For 28 years, you called her your own. Don't pretend this is about truth. It's about greed. And I won't let you rewrite my life just because you're afraid of sharing it with the one person who truly knew me. You may have power, but I had foresight. And now, so does she. The courtroom was silent. Martin's mouth twitched. He looked ready to combust. But then Rhea said, one more witness, Your Honor. For the record. And Patrice took the stand. Patrice was the nail in his coffin. She testified that Leona confided in her about the estate fears months before her death. That she suspected Martin was planning to challenge the will based on paternity. That Leona had visited Kieran. Had handwritten the letter. Had even recorded audio files of conversations with Martin discussing estate details. The defense tried to object, but the judge waved them off. Martin's entire face had turned gray. And when it was his turn to testify, he refused. The judge didn't even need time to deliberate. In less than 30 minutes, he ruled. The paternity test was irrelevant to the estate's legal claims. Martin Quinn had acted in bad faith to strip Leona's financial legacy. The will was upheld in full, and Martin's financial practices were now subject to an independent federal fraud investigation. But the best part? The judge awarded damages to me. Martin owed me restitution, to the tune of $3.9 million. I walked out of that courtroom lighter than I'd felt in years. But it wasn't about the money. It was about being seen, being believed, being my mother's daughter, in every way that mattered. Martin stormed past me in the hallway without a word. He wouldn't meet my eyes. And I didn't offer forgiveness. Not then. Not ever. The fallout came fast. Within days, Martin was forced to step down from his law firm. The bar opened an ethics review. His name disappeared from plaques, from brochures, from the gold lettering on his old office door.
Joel?
He lost his estate license. His clients fled. And no one showed up for him when he filed for bankruptcy 3 months later. Karma didn't just knock. It broke the door off its hinges. But as much as I wanted to celebrate, the truth was, grief doesn't vanish just because justice shows up. I still missed her. There were days I'd hear a song she loved, or walk past a garden shop she used to drag me into, and I'd have to sit down and breathe through the ache.
But now?
That ache wasn't poisoned with betrayal. It was pure.
Real.
Mine to hold without shame or doubt. I restored her art studio, hung up her final unfinished canvas, and began painting again. For the first time in years, I felt free. And then one morning I got a letter. Handwritten.
Sloppy ink.
No return address. Inside was a simple note. I don't deserve to ask this, but if you ever decide to forgive me, I'd like to talk. I stared at it for a long time. Then I folded it shut and tucked it beneath my mother's scarf. Not out of kindness, but out of power. Because forgiveness isn't something you owe to those who tried to erase you. It's something you choose, if and when you're ready. And I'm not ready.
Not yet.
I sometimes wonder how things might have been different if my mother had told me the truth sooner. If she'd sat me down and said, "He's not your biological father, but that doesn't make you less." But maybe she wanted to protect me, to preserve the version of him that smiled at my school plays, or bought me my first sketchbook. Maybe she hoped he'd stay decent, but he didn't. And in the end, he taught me the hardest truth I've ever learned. Family isn't blood. It's loyalty. And when that loyalty dies, so does the title of father. Would you have forgiven him? Or would you, like me, walk forward scarred, but unbroken? Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is refuse to forget.
And rebuild anyway.